I would like to introduce you to Aral Balkan. Aral will talk today about privacy as an innovation. We got to know each other in Malmö last year, where he had an amazing talk about how to look at user data, about privacy, about the monetization that is happening around that, and where the rights of the people are in a internet, in a connected world. So I'm extremely excited to have you talking here. Welcome, Aral Balkan.
Thank you so much for that lovely introduction, Thomas. It's lovely to be here. Thank you for having me. I'm standing here today because about 3 decades ago, a little over 3 decades ago, my father brought home a personal computer, one of the first ones. I was 7 years old. And along with it, he brought a programming manual, a basic manual. And he said a very important thing to me. He said, go ahead, play with it. You can't break it. And I did. I both played with it, and eventually I broke it, quite spectacularly with smoke and fire. If your dad tells you not to put a chip inside the computer, don't put the chip inside the computer, especially if he's a computer scientist. But the important thing about this was that with a few lines of code, I could create some stars. With a few more lines of code, I could create a spaceship, and I could fly my spaceship through this universe that I had created as a 7-year-old. If you can do that when you're 7, that's quite magical. It makes you feel like you can do anything. But there was one thing that this computer did not do, and never did. It did not track everything that I was doing. It did not store that information indefinitely. It did not then share all of this behavioral insight that it had about me with a corporation somewhere. And then it did not analyze that information to create a profile of me, to understand me better, so that it could exploit and manipulate me. It didn't do any of these things. In fact, if it did any of these things, if, for example, I installed an application and it tracked me and it told someone, maybe with my modem, then we knew what to call that application. We called it spyware. We called it malware. Today, we call it the next potential billion-dollar Silicon Valley success story, right? The unicorn. So things have changed, and there's a reason for that. The personal computing era that I was very lucky to be born into was the last time that we had decentralized technologies. It was not the first era in computing, however. Before personal computers, we had the era of the mainframe computer. Now, these were large computers that were owned by institutions, whether they were universities or corporations, and you rented time on them. You did not own and control these machines. A corporation or a university did. But they were limited in scope. They were limited to within that organization for the most part. And then we got personal computers, and for the first time, we owned and we controlled our technologies. And they worked for us, and they did nothing else. And then we went back to the future, in a way, with the web. The web was introduced, and its ideology, its philosophy, if you talk to Tim Berners-Lee, its ideology and its philosophy is decentralized, but its architecture never was. It's client-server. So if you take a client-server architecture, the servers are the mainframes. So we kind of went back to the future. The difference being the scope. Now our mainframes are Google. Our mainframes are Facebook, and we all rent time on them. And we don't do it with money directly. We do it with something far more precious and far more intimate and far more personal to ourselves. But what really interests me, because this is like a pendulum. If you think about it, it's like a pendulum. Started out centralized, decentralized with personal computing, centralized again with the web. Now that pendulum is swinging. And what really interests me is what's coming next. So what is the equivalent of the personal computing era in the age of the internet? And what I personally want to do is to give that pendulum a good push in that direction. Because today, all of our technologies, all of our smart things, we love our smart things, right? Whether they're your smart television that you have in your living room, your smart watch that you wear, the smart car that you drive and that will drive you to places, the smart teddy bear that your children play with, or the smart pill that you take that broadcasts information about you from inside of you, they all work the same way. They work by gathering data, information about you. Now, this by itself is not the problem. This is a fact of life. This is how modern technology works. We're not going to change this. The key question, however, is who owns and controls these technologies and the data and the insight, the very intimate insight that they have into all of our lives. Now, if we can answer that it's us, we own and control these technologies and the data and the insight, there's no problem here. We have a system that is respectful of human rights. We have a system that is compatible with democracy as a social system. If, however, the answer to this question is that corporations do, and that by extension, this information is also shared and made available to governments, then we're starting to talk about a very different type of social system that we're living in. It's a corporatocracy, and this is not a democracy. This is not a question that we need to answer today, because we answered it about 2 decades ago. Today, we're not sleepwalking into something. It's not that if we're not careful, we will reach this, dystopia. This is where we are today. We are living in a world where all of our data, our technology is owned and controlled by corporations. It's a system that Shoshana Zuboff from Harvard Business School calls surveillance capitalism. Surveillance on the one hand, traditional capitalism on the other. Capitalism, of course, is about accrual of wealth. Surveillance is about accrual of information. What happens when you have a feedback loop between these two things? In the movie The Matrix, people live in a virtual space while being farmed physically in a physical space, where their bodies are being farmed. Today, I would argue that we live in the matrix inverted, where increasingly we live in a physical space, but we are being farmed from a virtual space. And when Mark, for example, tells you that privacy is dead, remember, this is important, that he's talking about your privacy, not his. Because when Mark buys a house, he buys the 4 houses around his house because his privacy is very much alive. When Mark uses a computer, he tapes up his microphone and his camera because his privacy is very, very important. So he's talking about your privacy. And you might wonder why. Why is this? That doesn't sound fair necessarily. Well, this is because Mark is a very special man. In fact, Mark is one of 8 very special men in the world today, according to Oxfam, which is a charity that combats poverty based in the UK. Today, according to Oxfam statistics, 8 men have as much wealth in the world as half of the world's poorest population combined. 8 men. There are no women in this statistic. 8 men have as much wealth as 3.5 billion people. Now, that's what we call systemic inequality. And that is the relationship that surveillance has with capitalism. Because if you think about who these 8 men are, one is Mark, the other is Bill Gates, the other is Jeff Bezos of Amazon, the other is Larry Ellison of Oracle, and the other is Michael Bloomberg of Bloomberg. Do you see the correlation? Now, what if, though, let's say you're lucky enough to be one of these 8 men. I mean, congratulations, you made it, wow. What should you do, though? Because this is a very interesting world that we're in. You should probably build some tall and wide walls around yourself, right, to begin with. Because, I mean, you've got a lot of stuff, and you got a lot of people out there who don't have a lot of stuff. The walls will help. But the walls are probably not enough. You also want to know what they're up to, right? So you should probably keep an eye on these people just to make sure, right? Just to make sure that they're not up to no good. They might be. They're mischievous. You know, who knows what they do. And you can do this in physical space, but you can, of course, also do this in virtual space. In fact, interestingly enough, this business of keeping an eye on everyone else seems to be the business model of some of the people who are on this list, like Facebook. So how does Facebook work? What is Facebook's business model? First of all, they have 2 audiences. One is their users. You all use this term, right? There are 2 industries that use the term user. One is us, technologists in the Silicon Valley kind of vein, and the other are drug dealers, right? And interestingly enough, it seems like we're both very interested in manufacturing addiction. So maybe it's an apt term to be using if this is our business. But they also have their customers. Now, the users are the people who use their products. They don't pay them. The customers are the organizations and companies that pay Facebook. And here's how it works. Facebook watches and tracks and stores everything that their users do, and then continuously analyzes them to build a profile of their users, which is not like a couple of pieces of paper in a manila envelope somewhere. It's a living, breathing simulation. It's a digital copy. Maybe a good one, maybe not a good one. Both have their problems. If you have a simulation of someone and it's not a good simulation, then you might think that they're a terrorist when they're not a terrorist. Maybe they were researching, they were doing research for their book that they're writing on murder, and you think that, oh, they're a terrorist. If it's a very good simulation, then it becomes a very valuable, very powerful proxy for exploiting and manipulating their behavior. So this profile is what they monetize with their customers. Now, you sometimes hear it said, oh, Facebook sells people to their customers, or Google sells people. No, 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 no. Please don't misunderstand this. If I own a copy of you, I'm going to protect that really, really well, right? Facebook has great security. Google has great security, because that's my asset. I own that now. And I'm going to use that and exploit it for the rest of your life. I'm not going to sell that to anyone. That is way too valuable. I might rent access to it, but I'm not going to sell it. And we do this in places that we call server farms. So I would implore you to ask yourselves, who is it or what is it that we're farming? Is it quite possibly people? I call this business model people farming. And Facebook, Google, and these businesses that have this business model are basically factory farms for human beings. When Facebook improves its products, it's like the massages that we give to Kobe beef. It's not for the benefit of the cow. It's to make the cow a better product. Right? In this analogy, you're the cow. And you have to understand, this is not a mistake. This is not someone messing up at Facebook, because that's usually how it's portrayed. Whenever they do something that makes this business model apparent, and people go, oh, I don't like what I see now. They go, oops, we made a mistake. It's not a mistake. This is their core business model. So when Mark was a young, starry-eyed kid, and he just wanted to make the world a better place, and he had a startup. Facebook was a startup at Harvard, right? He needed money. So where was Mark going to get his money? Of course, from a venture capitalist. So he went to the venture capitalist and he said, look, I have a business where I'm farming people. It's the business that you invest in. Okay, so we're compatible. And I think I'm really good at it. I'm going to be really good. In a couple of years, if I'm really good, we'll have 100, maybe 200 million people using this platform. How much money will you give me today for when we sell those people in 5 years' time or 6 years' time, either to a larger company or to the public with an initial public offering, an IPO? And the venture capitalist says, well, Mark, you're probably going to fail. 9 out of 10 of my investments are going to fail. But I see something special about you. You know, I think you're a really good person. I think you've got what it takes to become $1 billion unicorn. So I'm going to invest $5 million in you, right? But the venture capitalist invests this money not in Mark's business. The idea here with venture capital is not to create sustainable businesses. It is to invest in the exit. It's kind of like Vegas-style gambling, right? I have a table in front of me. I put 10 bets. I know 9 of those I'm going to lose. This one, I got to win big. I'm investing in the exit when this company is sold. And what kind of world does that create? So it creates a world where one company, Google, can watch you across 70 to 80% of the web when you're browsing the web. The 70% statistic is from Princeton. The 80% statistic is from my own web crawls. It gives you a world where one of the worst sites that I've been able to find, and they've changed it now after I've been talking about it for a while. LifeBuzz, anyone heard of LifeBuzz? It's clickbait. So it's a clickbait site called LifeBuzz. How many third-party trackers, so when you're on LifeBuzz, how many other companies do you think are watching you or know what you're doing? 10, 20, 30 third-party trackers? Maybe that's about average for most sites now. 40, 50, 60, 70, 80? Some of you probably work in this area. So any ideas? How about 172? This is the web we've created, people. I don't feel like taking a bow, though. So 172 trackers, what does that mean in terms of immediate externalities? It means that this site, if you block those trackers, becomes 2.58 megabytes lighter at every load, right? 2.58 megabytes. It means that you save 2 minutes of load time. Now, of course, it doesn't take 2 minutes for you to see the site, but it takes 2 minutes for it to load. Your battery is working for 2 minutes. But there's more. Now, remember, this site, just like Facebook and Google, has 2 audiences. They have their users, who they farm, and then they have their customers, who they need to get money from. So you go to their website and you see these amazing statistics. They're like, it's the most valuable audience online. These people are the best people. We got the best people to sell you. And they go, well, 72% are women, 87% are from the United States. Now we know, for example, what percentage of people in the United States browse the web on their mobile phones. We know what the average cost of a gigabyte of data is in the United States for mobile usage. So just using these, I was able to calculate that this one site costs just people in the United States who browse to this site on their mobile phones over $4 million every month in data costs just to load their trackers. No content. We're not even talking about the actual content. Just to be tracked by this one site, people in the United States are paying $4 million. So immediate externality, right? But we can go beyond that. This is just money. Okay, money, losing money, nobody likes that, but whatever. What about other externalities? Because Thomas mentioned, for example, how saving 50 milliseconds saved, what was it, 30 years of human life? That's what we're talking about here. So who's been to Forbes? Who goes to Forbes.com? Yeah? And they have this door slam, as I call it, interstitial, as some of you might call it. And it says, inspiring quote, advertisement. And it doesn't say continue, does it? It says 3, 2, 1, continue. Makes you wait for about 3-4 seconds. And then you have to hit the button every time you go on there. And they do it once a day because they don't want to piss you off too much. They want to piss you off just enough, right? Just enough so you'll come back. But what does this mean? So you lose about 5 seconds before you can hit that button. Well, they're a very, very popular site. So they get 46 million unique visitors monthly. 46 million unique visitors. Let's say they visit once. Let's be very conservative. And they lose 5 seconds. What does that mean? It means that every year, 87 years of human life are lost to one interstitial on one site. Now, let us not forget that this is the mainstream business model of the web today. Let's extrapolate from there, the human cost of what we're doing. And then we have fake news. Who's a fan of fake news? Who loves fake news here? Some people, big fans over there? Okay, cool, that's good to hear. You really like fake? Okay, yeah, I love it, man. It's great, best reading. Why? It's awesome. Why do we have fake news? We have fake news today because we don't have a free press anymore. What we used to call the free press is now the behavioral advertising industry. We follow the eyeballs no matter where they go. And the eyeballs might go to places that you don't want them to go. Because we have, instead of a free press, ad tech. So Axel Springer is one of the largest publishers in Europe that you might have heard of. Their lawyer actually said this at a court case. The core business of the plaintiff is to deliver ads to its visitors. Journalistic content is just a vehicle to get visitors to view the ads. So let's think about it for a second. What have we made journalism into? We've made journalism into bait. It's what we use to get people to look at our ads. Why do we have fake news? That's why we have fake news. And we're going further with this business model, though. We're no longer content with just scanning people, because that's what we do. The business of Google and Facebook is to scan you. It's a scanner. When you get an Android phone that has Google Play on it, that's a scanning device, right? That's there to scan you. That's why it's cheaper than an iPhone, for example. But where do they want to go with this? So Google now can track when you actually go and buy something with your credit card and link it to your behavior online. So they can they've started tracking what you're doing in tangible space as well. Facebook has 60 people working on reading your mind, literally. This is not from some conspiracy website, this is from their developer conference, as announced by them. So if you need one photograph to summarize to you everything that I've been talking about, surveillance capitalism, it's this one. The leaders of the largest technology companies in the world, who among themselves have more intimate information about more people than ever before in the history of mankind, sitting at the same table as then President-elect Donald Trump. If this does not scare the shit out of you, I don't know what will. So that's surveillance capitalism. But I'm not here to talk to you about the problem. We have to articulate, understand the problem so that we know what to do about it. But I want to talk to you about how we can move beyond surveillance capitalism and why it's in all of our interests, no matter what we're doing today, no matter what your job is, no matter what your company does, no matter how you make your money. It is in all of our individual interests as human beings to move beyond this toxic business. So let's start with some fundamentals so that we're on the same page. We all talk about data, right? Data is so big right now. Have you heard? Data is the new oil. But what are we talking about when we say data? Are we talking about rocks, information about rocks? Or are we talking about information about people? Because these are very different things, and yet we usually just use this one term, unqualified, to talk about them in some universal abstract. And it's very interesting to me because I can't emotionally hurt a rock. I can't physically hurt a rock. I can't incarcerate a rock. And I can't deprive a rock of its life. But I can do all of those things to people. So what happens if we start, for example, creating regulations, or we decide on what's permissible and not permissible based on what's okay for rocks, and kind of include people in that as well? Who gets shortchanged there? Is it the rock or the person? Because I think it's the person. But what is data about people? Let's say I have a figurine, a tiny little statue. If I have enough data about this statue, I have a 3D scanner, for example, I can take a 3D printer and create an exact replica of this figurine. So I want you to imagine what I can do if I have enough data about you. I'll give you a hint. I'm not interested in 3D printing you. I am interested in owning a copy of you. Very interested in that. I'm very interested in simulating you and owning that copy. But we have to start to understand that the business of Silicon Valley is to digitize people, and that if you have enough data about a thing, it approaches the thing itself, especially with the right algorithms. So data about people, we use a lot of euphemisms. Let's not. When we're talking about data about people, we're talking about people. If we think about it that way, it'll make it much harder for us to do bad things to people. So let's call them people, and let's think of it that way. Because this is really about personhood. This is about personhood in the digital age, and it concerns every one of you sitting here, no matter what level of privilege you have today. Because this is you. And this is how we normally draw the boundaries of the self, at our biological boundaries. That's how we've done it traditionally. Now, people started out as property. Remember that. People did not start out as people. They started out as property, historically. We've only had personhood and person rights and human rights for a very short period of time in our existence as human beings. But through the struggles over hundreds of years of many, many people, we did actually gain human rights. We gained a system of justice that understands the limits of the self, the borders of the self, and how to protect that from abuse. We call it human rights law. So what happens today, though, when modern technology comes into the mix? When I have an idea, and I don't want to keep that idea just in my head, but I want to store it on my phone, do I have a conversation with my phone? Do I say, hey, phone, could you write this down in your notes app? And does my phone, like a butler, say, sure, or I'll write this down in your notes app? Is this our fundamental relationship to technology? If it is, then surveillance, for example, is what it's always been. Signals capture between two actors. You may not like that, but that's what surveillance has traditionally been. That's what the Stasi did, right? But what if our relationship to modern technology is different? What if, when I have an idea in my head, and I don't want to keep it just in my biological brain, I extend my mind, and thereby extend myself using my technology? In which case, it would make perfect sense to extend the boundaries of the self, our understanding of these boundaries, beyond our biological boundaries, to include the technologies by which we extend ourselves. Now, if we do that, constitutionally, what does surveillance become? Surveillance becomes something very, very different. It becomes an assault on the self, an infraction of the self, at which point we already have a system of justice and laws that knows how to deal with such assaults. So, to make any meaningful progress in this matter, we have to first of all understand that we are cyborgs. And I don't mean that we implant ourselves with technologies like the science fiction version. Most of our technologies today are not implants, they are explants. They're external organs, they're not internal organs, but they're organs nevertheless. Our relationship to technology today is not that of a master to a butler. It is that of a cyborg to its organs. And if we care about protecting personhood and the integrity of the self and individual sovereignty in the age of the internet, then we have got to apply our existing human rights to this notion, this extended notion of the self, the cyborg self. We don't need a new set of rights. You'll hear people coming up with a Magna Carta for the web, or data rights. Data doesn't have rights. Human beings have rights, right? We don't need digital rights. We need to apply the human rights we have to an understanding of the self in the digital age. So we need to move beyond the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, hack it to make it into the Universal Declaration of Cyborg Rights. Now, some of you might be thinking, this is great theory. Aral, thank you. Thank you for coming down from your ivory tower and telling us about this lovely theory that you have. That's great. Not really theory. So last month, I joined the first pan-European political movement in Europe called DiEM25, which was set up by Yanis Varoufakis, who was the ex-finance minister of Greece. Some of you might have heard of him. This is some of our coordinating and advisory committee, and we have about 60,000 members. And I joined them. I actually went to them and I said, look, I love your progressive politics, because what they want to do is they want to create a progressive internationalism so that we have an alternative, a progressive alternative to either austerity internationalism or to kind of the far-right Brexit. Well, how about a progressive one? But what they did not have was a technology policy. So I went to them and I said, look, guys, you're not going to tackle the social issues without understanding technology today because they amplify one another. So that's what we're doing at DiEM right now. We have 6 pillars, and now we're going to have a 7th one, to create an internet of people going forward. So I want to quickly take you through what this means in terms of what is a progressive tech policy and how do you guys fit in to this? Like, what can you do in your everyday work and what you're doing with your companies, for example? How can you take some of this into consideration? Because this is coming. I'm not just writing a book about this. I mean, I am, but I'm not just writing a book about this. We're actually putting this into practice. We're going to have we're going to put into electoral practice with our policies. First of all, we have fires we need to fight. Some of you might not be even aware of these fires. There's an e-privacy regulation that's at the European Parliament right now, which sounds great. E-privacy regulation probably protects your privacy, right? I think the E stands for erosion of. So, for example, one of the things is Wi-Fi tracking awareness. So this regulation that's coming in says that, you know, if you're being tracked as you're walking in the city, you're walking in Zurich, and you're being tracked. You're being tracked with Wi-Fi, you're being tracked with Bluetooth by companies that you don't know. All they need to do to comply with European regulation with this is to put a sign up saying you're being tracked. That's it, and it's legal, it's okay. Okay, so how do I not be tracked? Oh, turn your phone off. Not acceptable. We have over here, metadata processing requires consent. That sounds great. If they want to process my metadata, then they have to ask me for consent. That sounds great, right? This is positive. Who are they? Internet service providers. Oh, but they couldn't process my metadata in the past. That's true. Yes, they couldn't. Now they can. Oh, okay. So my internet service provider can now look into my history and behaviorally analyze me, just like Google and Facebook does, but they require my consent. Okay. Whew. Wait a minute. What happens if I don't give my consent? Oh, you don't get access to the internet. Wow. This consent sounds a lot like extortion to me. Thank you. No, we're not. So there are fires we need to fight, right? Strong end-to-end encryption is under threat. In the United Kingdom, they actually passed a law this year that became law this year. They passed it last year. That basically de facto makes encryption illegal. They have not executed on this. But the UK government has the right today to ask for backdoors into any communications technology. And if you cannot give that backdoor, if you cannot give the data that you have to the UK government, then what you're doing is illegal. Which means that end-to-end encryption de facto is illegal today in the UK. Again, they're not executing on this, but they have the right, the legal right to do so if they want to. And people like Amber Rudd have said, we want to. Net neutrality. Should every packet be equal on the internet? Should all people have equal access to the internet? Well, that's under threat. We have things like Wikipedia 0, Facebook 0, free basics. This is companies and organizations saying, look, we're going to give our stuff for free, which sounds great, until you realize that it comes with caveats. Not everyone can do that. Not everyone can afford to give it for free for Facebook, so it kills all of the new competition that might exist. And when Facebook with free basics went to India, for example, and said, look, we want to connect your 5 billion, the next 5 billion, part of your population to the internet, and we want to do it for free. And initially they were like, oh, cool, that sounds great. Thanks, Mark. Why are you doing this? Oh, well, it's not the internet. It's kind of like Facebook. and a few other sites, and we get to watch everything that you do. And India said, no, no thank you. And then Mark Anderson, one of their board members, famously said on Twitter, what did he say? He said, anti-colonialism has worked so well for India in the past, why shouldn't it today? Or something along those lines. Anti-colonialism. He called them anti-colonial as a bad thing. So, we have fires we need to fight. That's in the very short term. But beyond that, we need to really change how we regulate. Now, we can't regulate today. So this is not an issue because we're institutionally corrupt in Europe. The European Commission and commissioners get lobbied with hundreds of millions of euros by corporations. And so we can't really regulate effectively. That's a big problem. The same people at the European Commission who should be protecting your rights as individuals against, for example, Google and Facebook, in 2 years' time will probably be working at Google and Facebook. So we call these revolving doors. So that makes it harder to regulate. This is all legal. It's not like corruption in the old, corruption in other countries, how you get money under the table. We're far beyond that. This is all legal. We have public-private partnerships. We have multi-stakeholderism. Not everyone's stake is the same size, but multi-stakeholderism. And we have co-regulation. For example, we invite Google to the table, and we say, Google, tell us, how should we regulate you? And Google goes, thank you for asking. We have some ideas, and my friend Peter will show you the presentation. And by the way, we paid for the table. Great. So you can call it all of these things, or you can call it what it really is, which is institutional corruption. And so our first policy at DM, for example, is not going to be tech policy. It's going to be combating institutional corruption. Unless we can do that, we can't really regulate effectively in Europe. But then we will regulate effectively. And here's where it becomes more interesting for some of what you guys might be doing. Right now, in the Silicon Valley model, you have all of your eggs in one basket. If you're following the Silicon Valley model, you have all of your eggs in one basket. Now, you are hoping and praying that we fail in regulating, that we cannot regulate you. When I talked to Eric Schmidt in London, kind of at a social cocktail party event, the one thing he said to me that stuck with me is, I wake up every morning and I fight regulation. That's my job. It's what I do. It's the one thing that scares them to death. And we are. With the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation, what you can do in terms of abusive behavior to people with their data is being reduced. And we're going to have other regulation that comes in. So the question for anyone who's working with this system is, do we want all our eggs in this one basket, the Silicon Valley model? Now remember also that you are competing with Facebook and Google at a game that they created. You're not going to win that. And you can see right now that you're not winning it because between those two companies, they control about 99% of the revenues that are coming in from advertising online. You can't be as ruthless as they can be because the laws, even today in Europe, do not allow you to. And I know that, Switzerland's a little different, but wait for it. So I think it makes a lot of sense to at least consider alternatives. How can we diversify from this model? How can we compete? How can we effectively compete with Silicon Valley without playing by their rules? Because that's legal legislation. There's also technological regulation. That's what we're working on with our tiny social enterprise that we have in Malmö, Indy. We have an app called Better, which is free and open source, and also on the App Store, so regular human beings can download it as well as tech people. And what it does is it technologically blocks trackers. So we're not waiting for the legislation. We're just saying, look, we don't like what you're doing. We think it's wrong. We think it's unethical. We're blocking it. So I was looking on for example, Tamedia's webpage yesterday to see what you guys are doing, some of the stuff. And you work with AppNexus, I heard. Does anyone here know AppNexus? Do you work with it? Some of you do, right? So yeah, we block it. And it's very popular. It's on 12% or so of the sites that I've been on. So this is one of the big trackers. It's not Google big, though. Google is on like 70, 80%, remember, right? You're on 12. You're still not competing. They're like kicking your asses. But they're both blocked, so that's equal, at least with better. But here's what's really interesting to me. Okay, so AppNexus, for example, and that's all it takes to block it. Oh my God, guys, do you see, this is like a markdown page. That's how we write our rules. Do you see the block domain, the block rule there that just has a domain? Like, you know how much money AppNexus makes, how big they are, how many people work there? That's all it takes to block it. That's it. Seriously. And boom, no data. Okay, so they have that. They also have yieldoptimizer.com. Who knows about yieldoptimizer.com here? Just, do any of you know that? Because unless you're from AppNexus, you probably don't. Okay, so this is amazing. I got to share this with you. You go to yieldoptimizer.com, okay, and there's no site. So I was like, okay, what is yieldoptimizer.com? It's coming up. What is it? And then you look at who owns the domain. And I don't know if you can see that, but this is so beautifully ironic, right? It says, not available. The privacy is protected by domains by proxy. This is a tracker protecting its privacy. I love this. This is so cool. Anyway, we still block it, but we found out afterwards it's by AppNexus. So again, this is how easy tracking is to block. How much do you want to bet your future on something that is that easy to block? So what else can we do? Well, we combat institutional corruption, we regulate effectively. Now here's where we have some alternatives. We can support and build stopgaps, ethically designed ones. Now I want to tell you what I mean by ethical design. Ethical design is all about respect, right? Respect for three important things. One, for human rights. Two, for human effort. And three, for human experience. Now you all are probably pretty familiar with the last two. It's the first one that I really want to spend some time on. What does it mean to respect human rights and when we're designing? It means we build things that are decentralized if we can, that are zero knowledge, that don't know anything about the people using our products, that are interoperable so that we're not locking people in, that are free and open so that anyone can contribute to it. Better is free and open. We make money from Better. How? Because not everybody wants to run the app themselves, build it and whatever. They want to click a button on the App Store and download it. And they do, and they pay us. Experience really matters in this. You can have something free and open and still make money from it, and you get the goodwill. And sustainable and secure. So beyond that, of course, let's build things that are convenient and functional and usable by people. And beyond that, let's also build things that are beautiful experiences, that improve people's lives. Because think about it. Experiences are all we have in life. And then we die, right? So it's up to us as people who make the things that people are having these experiences with today, primarily. It's not just experiences with people. A lot of our time is spent with experiences with things. It's up to us. We have a responsibility to make those experiences as effortless, as beautiful, as caring, as convenient, as wonderful as we can. So that's what ethical design is about. Now, what does that mean for you in your lives? It might mean today stopgaps. It might mean not using Gmail, right, just as a personal thing, and using Fastmail. You pay a few, dollars for it or pounds, and nobody reads your email. Well, apart from the government, because it's still not encrypted. If you don't want the government to read it, encrypt your email. It might mean supporting, when you have two companies that look like they have the same product, supporting the one that actually sells you products and not people. Now, this is where it comes into what maybe some of what you guys are doing as well. Because how does Apple make its money? Apple makes its money by selling you these very shiny gadgets, right? At a price that makes them very happy. You buy an iPhone 7, and then you throw it out the window. Apple loves you. Apple's like, that's great. I don't know why you did that, but hey, we're happy. You buy an Android phone, and you throw it out the window. Google hates your guts. Google's like, why the hell aren't you using it? That's why it's so cheap, so you could buy it and use it. Use the damn phone. Why? They only get their money when you start using the phone, not when you buy it. Because their business models are completely different. Apple sells products to people. Google sells people to people. Now, what happens when we start getting our regulations through? That's why I had handcuffs on the first slide. What happens when we start putting handcuffs on what Google can do? When we start saying you can only keep data for the reason you collected it, when we start saying you can only keep it for this amount of time, when we start saying that you need consent to use it for anything else, those are handcuffs on Google. What's Apple doing at that time? Like, doesn't concern us. It's not what we're doing. What is Apple doing today to show you that that is true? They're putting machine learning not on their servers, but on the devices. Your devices are getting smarter about you. Your own device is getting smarter about you. No corporation somewhere is. So think about that. They're using differential privacy in what they're building. Why? Are they good guys? You know, are they just like amazing? They just love you. No, they're a billion-dollar company just like Google, right? They may love you, they may not. I don't know, I don't care. But they have an absolute competitive advantage in privacy. No company is ever going to throw away an absolute competitive advantage. How often do you get an absolute competitive advantage? A thing that you can compete on without breaking a sweat, because that's not how you make your money, it does not affect your bottom line at all, that would make your main competitor go bankrupt. You think they're going to throw that away? They got to be crazy to do that. There are new business models that are coming out, like platform cooperatives. There are new tools that are coming out, like Mastodon, which is a decentralized Twitter. What if, instead of having a Twitter account, you could just have your own Twitter? What if we can make it as easy to have your own Twitter, and as maintenance-free, and as seamless as having a Twitter account? A Twitter where nobody tells you what you can say and what you can't say, where you actually have freedom of speech. Now remember, that doesn't mean anyone has to listen to you. That's not how freedom of speech works, right? And if you say something that's illegal, then the police will still come around. But nobody else tells you what you can or can't do. Like I have my own. I run my own at mastodon.aral. And that means that I can do anything with my own API, because the API is no longer a key owned by someone who owns the lock, who's someone different. I own the lock as well. Talks.chat, which is a decentralized chat application. So these alternatives are coming. They're already functional, and more than functional, they've been functional for a while. Now they're becoming convenient. So you can't really ignore what's happening in the decentralization space. I built a prototype myself of a decentralized social network. It was a beautiful Mac application. What it was at its core was a mesh network of storage. You didn't need to care about that. It was a way for you to send a photo to your friend, where with Facebook, you would have to send it to Facebook so that Facebook could scan the photo, run emotional analysis, and store that information, and then send it to your friend. With what we built, you just sent your photo to your friend directly, as it should be, as you would normally. If Mark was here, and you didn't know Mark, and you wanted to share a photo with your friend, you would not go to Mark and say, Mark, could you give this to my friend and just really take a good look at the baby and maybe, make a photocopy? You'd never say that. You'd be like, Mark, you're fucking creeping me out right now. Stand over there. I'm just going to give my... So what about you guys? Right? So I was on your site last night. I was thinking, what can you do? I love your bot, by the way. It didn't understand what I was talking about. How about decentralized behavioral ads? Now, I know some of you are working on behavioral ads. That's fine. You're not bad people. This is the mainstream. Welcome to it. What about decentralized behavioral ads? Look at what Apple's doing with machine learning, putting machine learning on the devices themselves. Now, I know at least one person who's working on a solution for this right now. What if your device is watching your behavior and shows you relevant advertising, but you as a company know nothing about that person? Would you still be happy with that? I think you might be. Would the GDPR apply to you then? No, no handcuffs. Would any of the regulations that we're going to pass apply to you then? No. You're respecting human rights. Why should we care? The problem isn't advertising. The problem is definitely not advertising in a traditional sense. It's not branding. The problem is surveillance-based ad tech. And you don't even have to do it for behavioral advertising. So maybe consider why you're not investing in this. And maybe lead the way in Europe with that. What about alternative monetization? You have platforms like Flatter. My friend Linus Olsson runs this. And they just got bought by IO. And I have no good words to say about I/O, but I love Linus, and he knows that. But venture capital, right? You got to have your exit. What about alternative ways of monetizing? Brave is working on this. Flatterer working on this. Why aren't you investing in this? Or premium products. How unsuccessful is Apple today with a strategy of providing premium products? How unsuccessful are they, right? They're not. It works. We have a multi-billion-dollar case study. But this is the short term. This is still the medium term. In the long term, I think we have an opportunity to create a future that we can all be happy with. I call this an internet of people. And I want you to imagine it. Just imagine it. Imagine an internet where we all have our own space that we own and control, where people can find us, where we hold the keys. Imagine that it is this space that all of our smart things connect to, not to the Googles, not to the Facebooks. Imagine that this is a space not provided by any one company or by governments, but by lots and lots of different companies and organizations, because it's interoperable. And what do they get out of it? They provide a service, and they compete on providing the best service possible, which really should be what corporations are doing. Now imagine this. And if we think that this is something that we want, that would benefit the commons, that would create a public sphere that we're lacking today, that would get rid of maybe some of the fake news problems, the surveillance problems, the human rights abuses that we have, if this is something positive for humanity and in the common good, maybe we will consider supporting it from the commons, the base. We support the base from the commons. We say it's your human right to have this, and we're going to use our taxpayer money to give you that base. It's free and open, though. Any one of you in this room can extend that functionality. And then, of course, give it back to the commons. But what you can do is build businesses on charging for the additional functionality that you create on top of it. We build an ethical core, and we build an ethical economy on top of that. We take a centralized world, and we decentralize it. We go from the corporatocracy that we're living in today to being able to say who owns and controls our data, our technology, the insight about us, our persons. Why we do. Now that is the future that I'm working to build. I believe in my heart that every one of you sitting here would love to live in that future, or would want to be part of that future. And quite differently to a lot of the audiences I speak to, you actually have the ability, the skills, and the knowledge to build that future. So all I can tell you is I hope you will join me in building the future that we all want to live in. Thank you. Thank you very much. I was going to keep it at 45 minutes and take some questions, but it's actually 52 minutes. So I don't know if it's best to take some questions now. I know we're probably running a little over from the beginning, or I'm here the whole day, and you can talk to me, and I'm looking forward to chatting to you. Should we do it that way? Thomas, you're the one running the show.
I think so.
Okay, so thank you so much, and I look forward to chatting with you and to the barbecue tonight. Thank you again. Thank you.